primer on Rhino for people who already know CAD. The first thing I've done is to enable the O-snap and filters down here, and I've docked them to this side. I recommend turning on end, near, point, mid, intersect and quad snapping. You'll use these literally all the time. Right-clicking on one of these, like the center, makes the snapping only to that one. Same for here, if you only want control points, right-click. Then I have a toolbar here with my most used commands, and you can create one yourself by going to the toolbar's properties and doing a new toolbar, both images and text, and there you go. To dock a toolbar on the right side like I have here, you need to unlock Windows first, and then you can drag on the empty area here to get a highlight. If you want more toolbars in the same area, you drag on the tabs. When you find a tool you like, you control drag it to the toolbar, and if you don't want it anymore, you shift drag it away. When you first start Rhino, it might also look like this. I recommend going to the view settings and enable single click maximize, so you can quickly click on the viewport title to change it. You also probably won't see surface by default, and that's because the wireframe mode is selected. Switch to shaded mode. I also recommend you to go to the settings and customize the display modes to your liking, or even download custom ones. Another thing I also strongly recommend you to change is the highlight color. Go to the appearance, colors, and change the selected objects to something more appealing than the default yellow. Finally, you might need to open your 3D connection settings and set it to object mode and possibly reverse any accesses so you get comfortable navigating in 3D. So in Rhino there's lines, curves, circles, arcs, surfaces, and polysurfaces. There's more than that, and a line is also a curve, but let's start here. Polysurfaces can be closed, similar to a solid body in a solid modeler, or open, similar to a sheet body in other CAD packages, and also exploded into their individual surfaces. You can also always extract or copy surfaces or duplicate edges to get the curves back. I'm right-clicking to proceed to the next step in these commands, and you can also right-click to repeat the last command. You just saw me dragging things around, and you can change drag alignment between construction plane and the current view, and see this reflected in the cursor. And you can also change the dragging sensitivity and snap radius. The next thing you should know is moving things from point to point using snapping, and you can see in the pop-up here the distance and type of snap you're getting. And of course rotation. In both of these tools you can just type a value on the keyboard to get more precise results. There is also a nice rotate 3D command where you can click anywhere twice to create a temporary axis for your rotation. The next tool is the most useful thing in all of Rhino, which makes it super quick to work with, and that is the gumball, which you enable down here. The gumball allows you to move objects freely in the X, Y, and Z direction, and also rotate and scale. Hold down Shift to do equal scaling. You can also relocate the gumball. Click once to get a new position, or 3 times to get a custom orientation. By default, the gumball moves freely, but you can enable snapping, and in all tools, holding down Alt temporarily disables snapping. One final powerful mention with snaps is that if you hover over geometry, you get these gray temporary points, which create new smart guides you can snap to. Next up is editing objects. Select the objects and turn the control points on. I also have this on my toolbar. You can shift right click any command in any toolbar to find out what they are and copy them to your own. Again, the gumball enables quick manipulation. This surface is a single span surface, which you can see from the single ISO line in each direction. But it's also a plane, and to get some curvature going, we need to rebuild it to a higher degree. Here I'm limiting my selection to control points and using a selection brush to just drag across to get the control points I want, and then again using the gumball to add shape. Next I'm using a simple box selection, and there's also a lasso selection, which is called fence here. If you type SEL into the command line, you get a list of all of the commands which has to do with selections. Two other basic surface manipulations are extending and, of course, trimming. I always recommend to trim with the surfaces because the trim direction for curves is implicit and difficult to control. Automatic extension of trim surfaces and curves also does not function well in Rhino, so you need to always ensure that the thing you are trimming with entirely covers the thing you want to trim. When it comes to blending surfaces, you need to use different tools depending on the situation. And it's unfortunately a bit inconsistent. The variable blend surface takes two surfaces as input and builds a blend between them, but still requires those surfaces to be intersecting. The regular blend surface command, even though it's called blend surface, takes two edges as input, and the surfaces can't be intersecting. You do have control for tension on both sides or separate sides, and even on the individual corners. And you can also skew by holding Alt, but unfortunately there's no way to reset this or realign to the surface tangent edges. If you join two surfaces together to a poly surface, you can use fillet edge to get a radius fillet or blend edge to get a G2 design fillet. Both of those tools can do chordal with fillets, and they're both variable. Finally, let's do some actual modeling. Before we begin, make sure that history is always being recorded. This is unfortunately very fragile in Rhino, but it's extremely powerful when it works. I'm drawing a centerline curve in the right view and profile curve in the top view. Next, we'll create a small construction surface using extrude curve, which can go in any direction you want, but I'm holding shift to snap it to the x-axis. Our design surface is going to be a simple loft, which can go through any number of curves, but we're just using two. Now we're finally getting to aligning surfaces, or matching as it's called in Rhino. This is the most time-consuming part and often requires a lot of manual tweaking. I'm using match multiple here to align the top of the loft to the edge of the extrude using tangency, and the bottom of the loft to the profile curve using position. Now I need to explain something about NURB surfaces before we proceed. We've seen previously how the surfaces are built from points just like the curves are. And the tangency matching on these surfaces caused some of our points to move around, while the position matching in this case seemingly has not. The reason is that position matching only affects the first row of control points, while tangency matching affects the second, and curvature matching affects the third. This is called G0, G1, and G2. Since we're just using G1 and G0 on this surface, and due to my loft settings, that has left me with an extra row of control points which I currently don't need. Another thing you should know at this stage is that the control points extend in two directions across the surface, the U and V direction. This is shown in Rhino by these unfortunately very small red and green lines. I already have the select V tool on my toolbar, so I'm going to use that and just hit delete to get rid of that row. One last thing before we get back to modeling, I'm just going to do some housekeeping and create a layer for the construction surface, which I'm coloring red so it's easier to see what surfaces belong to which layer, and then I'm moving the object to that layer and hiding it. Then I'm also creating a mirror of the design surface across the y-axis. And the reason I'm doing all of this with history enabled is that we can now control our design with our two initial curves and see how a change impacts the entire form. Note that you can unfortunately only have a single piece of history active per object in Rhino, and I strongly want to emphasize again how incredibly fragile history is. I recommend you to use a command to purge the history from the affected objects once you want to move on to something else. Before we end this video, I'm gonna show you one of the analysis tools, and they're all pretty basic, so you sort of need to understand what their limitations are. To see curvature comps on a surface, you go into the curve menu, and then you need to increase the isocurve density for the surface. This isn't actually affecting the surface itself, just the display of it, but it's a little bit unclear, unfortunately. However, once that is done, when you manipulate surfaces, you will get real-time feedback on the curvature comp, so you can check that they are transitioning nicely across the symmetry plane. This tutorial has now ended up being twice as long as I imagined, and I've glossed over so many things. But just to do one final thing, let's create a glossy material for the rendered view, which is kinda nice. Again, I'm placing my surfaces in a new layer, and then instead of assigning a color to that layer, I'm clicking on the column behind it to adjust the layer material, and then I'm just clicking to create a new paint material at full gloss. Hopefully this was enough to get you started, so you can now continue exploring on your own and get comfortable working with Rhino.